Elwha River sedimentation, post-dam removal and ecological impacts by Kenneth.
Northern Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, the Elwha River historically has carried sediment from the mountain peaks of the Olympics to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. After the Elwha Dam and Glines Canyon Dam were built, more than 90 years of waterway interruption caused the buildup of an estimated 20 million cubic meters of sediment behind these structures. Because of the lack of replenishing fine sand and gravel sediment passage to the river, severe erosion at the mouth of the river occurred when meeting to the strait. This will be discussed in the next section. In regard to wildlife, the Elwha and Glines Canyon dams caused there to be a 90% blockage of the watershed for anadromous fish species over the last 50 years, simply meaning that Chinook and other salmon species, as well as steelhead trout in this ecosystem, were prevented from completing their migratory life patterns. This detriment was also impacted by the lack of safe and efficient fish ladders on the dams.
So as for sediment and erosion, mouth of the river had been completely eroded due to the large amount of sediment being held back by the dams. Prior to the dam removal, sediment accumulation in Lake Mills was 3.2 times more than Lake Adwood, and sediment thickness was also about 3 times greater, reflecting differences in reservoir size and proximity to the sediment source. The widest and most active areas of lateral erosion occurred along the delta, which is the beach and near the mouth of the river.
After the construction of both dams in the early 1900s to generate electricity for the surrounding area, there was much contention over whether or not the dam should stay. In 1992, the U.S. Congress passed the Elwha River Ecosystem and Fisheries Restoration Act, which approved the full removal of both the dams. It was not, however, until more than 20 years later that they were both fully removed. Starting in September of 2011, the process began. It was not until August of 2014 that both were gone. This was not without complication. One of the main reasons why the full removal process took 3 years was there needed to be a slow release of water from the two reservoirs in order to try and reduce the ecological and economical impact downstream. In order to do this, they slowly let out about 3 to 5 meters from the reservoir level every 2 weeks. This, however, needed to be interrupted for up to 6 weeks if there was a salmon run along the river.
Post-removal management and results. After the dams were removed, the river mouth estuary was rebuilt by the sediment released. The river mouth habitat was extended by 400 meters. At the reservoirs, around 630 acres of formerly forested lands were reclaimed from the reservoirs. Native plants are being planted in the areas where the reservoirs were, reclaiming the habitat for wildlife.
So as for ecological impacts, there was a reawakening of summer steelhead runs, as well as an increase in population numbers of certain species like Pacific lamprey. With the removal of the dams, this allowed adronomous fish species to recolonize the available habitat from both of the previous dam sites. Also, macroinvertebrate taxa populations recolonized above dams, but however, biodiversity still remains low. Lastly, forests and other forms of native vegetation have been returning along the banks of the river.
So moving on to restoration efforts, the trapped sediment in reservoirs has moved downstream, restoring the riverbed and shoreline. There's been 2,000 pounds of native plants planted in Lake Mills and Lake Adwell. 67,000 seedlings have been planted for restoration, and salmon have returned to migrate upstream, as well as salmon are hatching upstream for the first time in a century. Finally, the current standings. Scientists are currently monitoring and evaluating the Elwha River. The National Park Service says it is rare to get to watch a river reborn, and what we learn from the Elwha River Restoration Project will help to inform future dam removal projects and restoration strategies. Dam removal has allowed wildlife and vegetation to naturally return, and restoration efforts are being taken to support the recovering ecosystem.